Now, I want to talk more particularly about the role and the influence of faith in Africa's development. We're looking at the past and the present. Through the years, faith and religion have been seen to be forces of both good and evil, contributing significantly to the socio-economic development of Africa, but sadly, and I say this with sadness, leading to many other negative issues across the continent. Nonetheless, let's consider the role of Christianity as a case study in the development of the African continent. These considerations will be made against the backdrop of four factors. Number one, educational advancement. Second, healthcare. 3, economic empowerment. And finally, promotion of peace and religious tolerance. Education and literacy programs. Many faith-based organizations of African descent have been increasingly active in the area of education and secular enlightenment. In addition to their core spiritual activities, various churches and faith-based organizations have been involved in educational initiatives such as the building of schools, colleges, the awards of scholarships to both deserving and undeserving individuals all over the continent. Nigeria, as a case study, is a religiously diverse country, home to some between 200 and 400 different ethno-linguistic tribes, predominantly made of Christians, Muslims, and then many who are of the Trado-African practices. Except for the southwest in Nigeria, which has a large population of Christians, Muslims, and indigenous African religions, the southern regions are predominantly Christians. Now I'm looking at Nigeria as a case study. Islam is widely practiced by the Hausa Fulani in the northern areas, being the dominant faith practice, whereas Christianity is practiced by numerous minority ethnic groups in the same region. This diversity can also be found in higher institutions of learning, as religious organizations control many private institutions. Christian groups own the most well-known and prestigious private educational institutions in Nigeria, extending to the continent of Africa. Among these institutions, using the universities as a case study, are the Afe Babalola University, the Babcock University, which is owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Covenant and Landmark University, owned by the Living Faith Church, the Bowen University, which is owned by the Nigerian Baptist Convention, Redeemer University, owned by the Redeemed Christian Church of God, the Joseph Ayo Babalola University, which is owned by the Christ Apostolic Church. Other faith-based universities include the Crawford University, which is owned by the Apostolic Faith Missions, and then the Mountaintop University, owned by the Mountain of Fire and Miracle Ministries, Madonna University, owned by the Catholic Church, and last in this list, the Ajayi Crowther University, which is owned by the Anglican Communion. These are among many other educational institutions and have altogether contributed immensely to the growth and the development of Nigeria and, by extension, Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, through their various programs. The church has always seen education as a critical cornerstone in the process of eradicating poverty and ignorance, and thus, it has not only initiated the establishment of educational facilities, but has also come up with measures to reach the unreached and the needy in the various places where illiteracy and poverty is rampant. Most of the faith-based schools are found in remote areas where the government has not been able to establish schools. These church schools are aimed at ensuring that the most marginalized people have access to quality and affordable education. The church has established various levels of educational facilities in different countries to aid learning and drive the campaign for literacy, especially in rural Africa. The educated population that has gone through these church-founded institutions have been and remain instrumental in the whole process of Africa's economic development. How true. Our second thought, healthcare and social services. According to a World Health Organization report, you may want to listen to this, about 60% of healthcare delivery in Africa is orchestrated by the church and or faith-based platforms. This is substantial in the backdrop of the fact that public health provision is hampered by weak governance, management flaws, and limited financing. In general, African governments allocate arguably less than 10% of their budgets to healthcare, and as such, the health sector is characterized by a short supply of health workers, depleted and dysfunctional health systems, limited availability of essential drugs, and poor health infrastructures. I come from the northern part of Nigeria, and I can tell you that these are not just theoretical statements. It's unfortunate when you get to some of these areas in Nigeria for a case study. I've traveled quite extensively across the African continent, and I've been met with very disappointing expressions of pain and, health issues, even across many supposedly cosmopolitan cities. Healthcare in Africa still remains a very serious issue, even among the organized African societies. In this difficult and challenging setting, church health services have dominated the provision of healthcare across the continent. Apart from missionary health facilities, the church has continued to play an invaluable role in offering preventive and curative medical services, particularly the local communities. The church has made significant contributions towards the primary healthcare program, such as provision of basic packages of health services to rural and underserved communities, assisting communities to develop and implement locally relevant and sustainable health programs, and ensuring access to health services for the most vulnerable and marginalized groups. The church health services have put more emphasis on the most rural and isolated communities where no other healthcare provider exists. In remote and poor localities which do not have roads or good road networks, and where people have to walk sometimes, and you believe this, for more than a day to reach the nearest hospital available, the church has maintained services that would easily have been abandoned by the state. This has not only served to bridge the gap in healthcare delivery, but also demonstrated the church's strong presence in uplifting the standard of such communities. The third area of focus in examining Africa's role is the area of economic empowerment, and particularly I'm looking at entrepreneurship, job creation, and social aid. The church has increasingly engaged in Africa's economic and social development by providing various supports and value-adding economic empowerment services for the well-being of the African people. For example, the church has been involved in giving both spiritual support and material contribution to the poor, the needy, and the less privileged within their churches and communities. I can tell you that myself and our organization have been actively involved in this wise. We've launched various programs. There currently is an agricultural empowerment program, and we've spent millions and millions of naira just putting together professionals along that line to help train and empower people. This came as our response to the harsh economic reality that is plaguing Africa, and that includes Nigeria, even though the largest nation within the African continent. The church has been actively involved in collaborating with private organizations and governmental institutions to help create jobs, give professional career trainings and workshops, set up entrepreneurship and business programs to as many individuals and local communities at large. Many churches have been at the back of the rise of many startups and SMEs with a view to promoting economic empowerment within their regions and extending same across the entire continent. Our fourth area of consideration, peace and religious tolerance. I took a deep breath because this is quite an interesting one. Religion has been a force of both good and ill in the stability of the African countries. This is a fact. In several destabilizing conflicts, conventional or low level, faith and religion have served as important undertones and sometimes as the outright basis for conflict and wars. Examples of these factors or examples of these kinds of incidences are, for a case study, the Boko Haram insurgency in northern Nigeria. This has largely been driven by extremist views. And then you may want to consider the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda that was formed in 1987 by Joseph Kony with the aim of overthrowing the Ugandan government of Yoweri Museveni and establishing a Christian theocratic state. In several other conflicts, religion has been an undertone, even if not a formal basis of conflict. In Nigeria, again, for instance, the conflict between the Fulani herdsmen, many of you have heard this or probably followed the trend through the lens of media. The conflict between the Fulani herdsmen and the farmers in the Middle Belt regions are often understood as fueled by land scarcity, grazing rights, and climatic change. But the truth is that they have a very strong religious undertone. The herdsmen are usually men of extremist views and practices, and the farmland communities they displace as part of the land grabbing program sometimes and most times are usually occupied or belong to Christian communities. This has been proven without any sense of prejudices, biases, or sentiments. In many regards, the law enforcement agencies on apprehending many of these extremist herdsmen, most of them have been found to be people who sustain extremist views, and their victims have usually been people of the Christian faith. But religion has also been a force for peace and peace building in Africa, contributing to possibilities for development. In Mozambique, for a case study, which experienced a 16-year civil war between Renamo and the Frelimo forces that left 1 million people dead and ended in 1992. Mozambique's churches played a decisive mediation role that ended the war. Interfaith religious groups have also played strong roles in peace building, in civil conflicts, in nations like Cote d'Ivoire and the Central African Republic. The church and many other religious bodies have played significant roles in the release and the freedom of many victims of kidnap and abductions, as we have in many parts of Nigeria, including the Middle Belt and so on and so forth. In fact, extending to all the African nations. I remember one time I returned from a meeting and I was met with a very serious distress call. And on responding, I was told that the abductors had taken some people that were affiliated to me. It was a group of people who had returned from a program, and all of them were abducted, and they were given 24 hours to present 50 million naira, else every one of them would be slaughtered. And because they were closely related to me, we mobilized, to inform the law enforcement agents, but clearly there seemed to be only so much they could do. And sadly, we had to get people, even of other faiths, to be able to talk perhaps with the abductors, if they could show kindness and mercy, and you would not believe the cruelty that came, cruel statements from those conversations. Sadly, one was shot on the foot. Usually, those levels of mayhem are unleashed to get you to see that they are serious. To cut the long story short, we ended up spending up to 20 million naira, even in the presence of law enforcement agents. Thankfully, they were all released. And we had the opportunity. You see, the challenge is when these people are released, they still are not fine. The trauma that they have to go through, some of them go through rape, some of them go through all kinds of traumatizing things, and it's one thing to get them free, then begin a process of constructive rehabilitation. Because some of them, even without the activity of terrorists again, they may end up dying. The trauma becomes too much, you see. And so I'm not just saying this as a lecture. These are realities that some of us have been forced to live with, especially when you become a leader within these regions. You cannot shy away from being part of the process that leads to some of these things. And so I'm just using that to point that the church has played very significant roles on this wise. Furthermore, the church has played significant roles in resolving ethnic and religious clashes in many parts of Africa. And in fact, have become partners with government and law enforcement agents in the promotion of peace, tolerance, and mutual respect. Religious bodies have actively organized peace concerts. Our organization has done that too as a case study. And so my work started largely in Zaria, for those of you who are familiar with Nigeria. And for many years, we experienced all kinds of religious crises. And so we came up with an initiative to hold periodic peace concerts. And the intent is not to advocate fanaticism. I'll be talking a bit about that before I conclude my discourse. And we successfully brought people from all religions, taking away all kinds of prejudices and promoting love. And you wouldn't believe how productive these concerts were. People came. We had all kinds of welfare activities, and people, Christians, Muslims, and any other person in between, they came, and it was very productive. I can tell you today that I have very good friends that cut across the religious divides. Very productive discussions. We may not agree on the core matters of faith, but I do not think it's been enough reason to hate, to fight, and so on and so forth. Are we together? Okay, so religious bodies have actively organized peace concerts, interfaith forums, sport activities, and public discussions in many parts of Nigeria and sub-Saharan Africa with a view to bridging the gap of intolerance and promoting peace and mutual respect.